Hello, thank you for joining us for our class, Your Voice, Your Choice, Proactive Care Planning for Your Healthcare Wishes. My name is Hillary Walker, and I am the Program Coordinator for Advanced Care Planning for the PeaceHealth Northwest Network based in Bellingham, Washington.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Melissa Enzi, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Advanced Care Planning in the Columbia Network for Peace Health.
Glad to be with you today to walk through the Washington State Advanced Directive. You'll see on this first slide is our Peace Health website. And this is a great resource for you to keep in mind, not only to register for these classes if you want to help spread the word, but also all of the documents we'll be talking about today are available for you to print for free off of our website. There's lots of frequently asked questions and other information, so feel free to check that out if you haven't already. So before we get started, just remember that your document can be revised at any time. So we really encourage you to just keep your pen moving and use this time together like a workshop. um, we hear from a lot of people that the idea of completing a medical advance directive has been there, but actually getting it done is sometimes the challenging next step. So feel free to keep your pen moving and use this like a worksheet. Or you can use a pencil or use sticky notes as a way to just track some of your thoughts, people you want to talk to about different parts of the document, etc. Um, if nothing else, you'll notice that there's name and date of birth on every page, so feel free to at least keep your pen moving in that way. Um, Also, as we're going through the document, keep in mind that you can add extra pages if you want to provide more information. You can also write in the margins of the document. So the document is meant to be a guide, but if you want to provide more information, you absolutely can do so. So, some of the things that we're going to be talking about today is to discover what is advanced care planning and why is it important. You'll hear us talk a lot about the importance of reflecting on your values and personal beliefs and how important it is to communicate these pieces in your medical directives and with those who are invested in your care. You will talk a lot about selecting a healthcare agent and how important it is to choose wisely and who might step in to make decisions for you if you're unable to make them for yourself. And then how to express all of this information into a legal document. Once the document is complete, how do we share the information? Where do we store the documents? We'll be covering all of that in our time together today. So let's just talk briefly about what is advanced care planning. So, advanced care planning is just what it sounds like. It's the process of thinking in advance about the kind of care we would or would not want if we had a medical event or condition and we were unable to speak for ourselves. It involves creating a plan, putting that plan in writing, and really sharing it with those who have an investment in our care. um, Advanced care planning and completion of advanced directives is really appropriate for all adults over the age of 18. As soon as we turn 18, we have the right to choose who we trust to make medical decisions on our behalf and any information we want to give in advance about the kind of care we would want. Um, Oftentimes in advanced care planning, the focus can be kind of narrow. And so a lot of the focus is on the completion of documents. But you'll hear us say over and over again, while the document is super helpful to have something in writing in a legal document, that really advanced care planning is all about an ongoing conversation. When you're walking through the document today, you're completing it for who you are today. If something were to happen in the next year or so, um, but relationships change, how we feel about our own health changes, our priorities change, etc. So it's really about that ongoing conversation with those who are invested in our care. And we hope and imagine that advanced care planning also brings up thoughts about other aspects of advanced care planning or thinking about our future, such as aging in place. Do I intend to stay in my home? What other care settings would I be willing to live in? What are supported living options in my area? Do I have a good grasp on what palliative care is, what hospice is, when those services might be appropriate? Things such as body disposition or how I want my body cared for at time of death, any final arrangements, etc. So we'll be really focusing on the Washington document and the components of completing a legal document, but there'll be a lot of side conversation happening, I imagine, in your own minds as well as in our time together today, because there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot to think about. So if we think about the legal document itself, it's called an advance directive. So, an advance directive, whether you're using the Washington state document we'll be walking through today, or you already have legal documents completed, or are possibly helping somebody in another state, all advance directives have essentially two parts, two components. One part is naming the who. Who will speak for us if we're unable to speak for ourselves? And that document is called a durable power of attorney for healthcare. The second part of most documents is the what. What decisions would you want your healthcare provider or healthcare decision maker to make on your behalf? And what information can we give in advance to help ease that time for them? You'll notice that the Washington state directive that we'll be going through today has a 4-page overview with lots of really great information. Um, and so that information might be helpful to give to anyone you're sharing your document with. Lots of FAQs and things that we have found that people are curious about. And the document itself is 4 pages. So if you printed out the whole packet, it will have an overview as well as the legal document. So simple way to differentiate between the two is really pagination. You'll see that circled in yellow. The document itself starts on the 5th page of the packet, but if you notice up at the top corner, it says page 1 of 4. And so the document itself, the power of attorney and preparing a healthcare agent, the who and the what, is 4 pages in Washington. And the pagination is really important, mostly for medical records or anyone reviewing the document to make sure that they know they have a full document. So we're going to start with page 1 of the document, and I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Okay. So, as Hillary said, we're starting on page 1 of 4, and the page we're on should look like this. And here, this is where you're actually jumping right in and naming your healthcare agent. So, naming that person who would speak for you if you were unable to speak for yourself. Some things to think about as we go through the whole document, but especially on here, is that we want as complete of information as possible. So, as much info as you're able to provide, as much information as you're able to fill in about the people that you're naming here, for example, is what we would want for you to write down. So at the very top, it says my information. So there you'll put your name, your pronouns if you prefer, and then your date of birth. And then below that blue box where it says naming a healthcare agent, this is where you'll name, it gives you a space to name one primary person and then 2 alternate agents if you wish. So, as you're thinking through this, I would encourage you to write on a sticky note here of who you're thinking of if you haven't spoken to them about it already, or if you want to do some clarifying. And especially after our time together today, there might be new questions, new learnings, new information that you want to make sure to share with those people. Um, so that everyone can be in alignment and have a good understanding. So as I stated, this document gives space for a primary agent and then 2 alternates. We'll talk a little bit more about naming alternates, but the alternates would only come into effect if the primary person you named was unable or unwilling for whatever reason to step into that role. You do not have to name two alternates, but it does give space to do so. So when we're thinking through how to choose or who to choose for a healthcare agent, there's some legal requirements that we need to be mindful of. That includes that the person is at least 18 years old in the state of Washington. Some would argue that 18 is pretty young to be making some of these big medical decisions. Um, and so just being mindful of the age and maturity level of who you're designating they're able and willing to engage in these level of discussions. They cannot be your physician or a physician's employee. The exception would be if they were family. So if you had a loved one who worked for PeaceHealth, for example, and you were receiving care at PeaceHealth, and that's where the decisions were needing to be made, they could be your healthcare agent. They just couldn't be acting in the capacity of their role as a PeaceHealth caregiver or employee when they're making those decisions. They can also, they're not able to be the administrator, owner, or employee of a facility where you live or receive care. So, for example, if you were to live in an adult family home, the owner of that adult family home could not be your named healthcare agent. So beyond the legal requirements, there's some qualities that you want to look for who would be a good person to name into this position. So the first is they have to be willing to have the conversations with you about your values and wishes. So if you sit down with them and say, I have some things I want to discuss with you about what's important to me, and how I feel about my wishes at the end of life. And their eyes get really big and they start backing away from the table. Or they just are really uncomfortable or they're just not able to engage in that level of conversation with you, then they may not be the best person to name because you're going to want to feel like they have a really good understanding of what's important to you. And the only way for them to do that is by having those talks. The second quality of a good agent would be someone who would be willing to follow your wishes, even if they disagree with the wishes for themselves, or they would have different wishes for you. So, a good example of this is we oftentimes see where families their loved one really wants to be they don't want to receive CPR, they don't want to receive some sort of treatment, the family really wishes something different. And so a good agent would be able to say, even though my wish for you would be X, Y, or Z, I know that for my mom, dad, sibling, friend, whatever it is, it would be really important to them that they didn't go down this path or that they did go down this path, whatever the answer might be. So they need to be able to step into your shoes, into your values, into what's important to you and your care, regardless of what they would wish for you or for themselves. They also need to be able to make decisions in stressful and sometimes emotionally challenging situations. So oftentimes when these people are called upon to be a part of medical decision making, an event or something has occurred where there can be stress and there can be a lot of feelings and it can be a lot of emotions, a lot of conversation that are coming at them potentially from different angles or viewpoints. So they need to be able to stand firm and know that they're advocating on your behalf and what's important to you, regardless of kind of the minutia that's happening around them. And then they have to agree to be your healthcare agent. So unfortunately, we see situations where someone has named a power of attorney for healthcare, or they've filled out a power of attorney for healthcare form and named a healthcare agent, and they haven't let the person know that they named them as their agent. And so, as you can imagine, those are pretty rough phone calls to make and say, "Hi, I have Sally Sue here, and you're named as their healthcare agent on the document that we have in their chart, and we need you to make some medical decisions," and that person had no idea. And so, thinking through this list and thinking through the people that are coming to mind, those would be good places to start or write on your sticky note or write on your document, but know that you may have to revise your list as you start to have these conversations with those people. So a question that often comes up here is, well, what happens if I don't write someone down or I don't select a healthcare agent? And in Washington state, we actually have a legal order of decision maker. So if something was to occur and you hadn't named a person on your document, um, we have this form here, but it follows the law the way that it's written for a healthcare organization to be able to reach out to find out who becomes the person to make a decision if you're unable to do so. So it starts at the top. The first would be a guardian appointed by the state. And again, this would only come into a play in certain situations. It's a very particular situation that involves the court system. So if a person didn't have a guardian appointed, the next would be that named healthcare agent. So regardless of who falls down the list or who wants to be involved down the list, if you have a named healthcare agent on an advanced directive or a legal durable power of attorney for healthcare document, that person becomes the legal decision maker. If you don't have one, you'll see there in the top blue part, it says your spouse or registered domestic partner, even if separated. So, in the absence of a named healthcare agent, the spouse or registered domestic partner would then become the decision maker. If you don't have a spouse or registered domestic partner, it then goes to your adult children. Um, and from there, it goes down the list to your parents, your adult siblings, adult grandchildren, adult nieces and nephews, adult aunts and uncles, and then lastly is a close friend who meets certain criteria. What you'll see, there's a little asterisk between for all of those groups. And here in Washington, the law is written that any group that has more than one person, all parties in the group must agree to the care. So as you can imagine, there's situations where someone has many children or even more grandchildren or parents who have been divorced for decades and haven't spoken, and then they're suddenly having to agree about the care for their child. Um, so there can be a lot of differing opinions, a lot of confusion. So that's where naming that healthcare agent, having the conversation with those people who are invested in your care, is kind of the gold standard best practice. But just so you're aware of, this is what would happen and the phone calls that would be made and the conversations that would happen in the absence of that document. So again, back to page 1 of 4 of the document itself. When you're ready to fill out this section and when you have that conversation and you feel confident that the people you're naming are your people, you'll want to make sure to fill in each box, as I said earlier, with the most up-to-date contact information that you have available. So best phone number, is that their cell phone? Or is it their home phone? Do they have both? Can we put one as the best number, one as an alternate? Um, their city, state, zip code, their address if you know it, but as much as you know. So if you only know their city and state and zip code, put that down. Um, the other thing that's really nice about this document is that it lists the relationship. So it helps to give some context to whoever's making that phone call to be able to say or know, am I calling their best friend? Am I calling their sister? Am I calling their niece? Who is that person in relation to the patient that's being discussed? As it says on this bullet point, you do not have to list an alternate agent, but it is strongly recommended, especially if your agent was to live out of town. So you absolutely can name a healthcare agent who lives across the country or a few hours out of where you live. That's completely okay. It can be nice to name someone who does live locally so that then if something were to happen, there could be someone who's in the same time zone potentially, or who's able to potentially come to the hospital, have eyes on the patient or you, and be able to then get a good sense of what's happening, what's going on, relay the information to the primary agent. Maybe it'll take time for the agent to fly into town, and they'll be unreachable for a period of time because they're on an airplane, something like that. So that alternate agent can just be a nice safety net, but you'll want to make sure that you have just as complete of a conversation with your alternates as you do with your primary named healthcare agent. They're down underneath where it gives the spaces to name your people. There's a couple of particular situations where if either of these apply to you, then you would want to put your initial next to them. So the first would be if I name my spouse or registered domestic partner as my healthcare agent and we later file for dissolution, annulment, or legal separation, I would want them to continue as my healthcare agent. Again, this is a particular situation and that we run into sometimes where people are choosing to separate finances to be able to access certain services. So if that is something that you anticipate happening, but you still would want your spouse to be your legal decision maker, then you would initial there. The next line says, if I'm not naming a healthcare agent, by sharing my goals and values in this form, it will be considered a personal value statement and not an advance directive. So this would only apply if in those areas above you didn't name any people. So you didn't put down a healthcare agent or any alternates, but you're completing the rest of the document because you want it to be used to guide decisions. Um, then you would put your initials there. As we go through the rest of the entire document, you'll see at the bottom of every page, it gives space for name and date of birth, and you'll want to make sure that that's complete on every single page of your document so that then when it gets scanned to medical records to go into your chart, we can make sure we have a full and complete document for you specifically. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Hillary.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Okay, so we're turning over to page 2, and you'll see page 2 starts the next portion of the document called Preparing a Healthcare Agent. So this is a combination of information that we have found is very helpful for who you've named on page 1, to know in advance in order to guide your care. Um, so it might seem a little strange to have questions related to values and wishes in this section because a lot of people think about power of attorney as just naming people, and that is the extent of it. But this document is really helpful to help clarify your values and wishes for who you've named on the first page in order to prepare them for that possibility. Um, this section will often get people's minds going. We have heard from families who have used the Honoring Choices document how helpful it is to see something in their own words and in their own handwriting of the person who completed the document. Because we all know when we get a letter from somebody in their own handwriting, we often hear their voice in our head, and it helps us really embody that person and make decisions based on what's important to them. um, so I encourage you to stretch a little bit and spend some time on these next 2 questions. The first one is, what matters most to me? So this section helps you think about what matters most to you. Again, the information can guide the people who matter to you, like your healthcare agent and loved ones, to make healthcare decisions if you're unable to make them for yourselves. Because what we know is that no document could cover every medical scenario. And what the decision making often comes down to is, what will the quality of this person's life look like if we say yes to this treatment, if we say no to this surgery, if we say yes to this procedure? What's the quality of their life going to look like, right? Um, so you have an opportunity to speak to what quality of life would be acceptable to you. Um, there's some questions here to get your mind going that you can consider answering. What do you love to do mentally and physically? How important it is for you to know who you are and who you are with. Another way of thinking of that is, what level of engagement is important to you on a physical and mental level, how important is being able to communicate with friends and family, what does living well or a good day look like to you, um, and what do you value most in your life? I really appreciate that question. What information can you put down that really speaks to who you are as a person? Um, so spend as much time as you can on this piece. Be specific. Add extra pages if needed. And I like to just give one brief example of a gentleman that I worked with who had very early stages of dementia. And I met with him and his wife, and we got to this part of the document, and he got very clear and strong in himself. And he said, a good day's waking up in my own home, kissing my own wife, making a really strong cup of coffee, and taking my dog for a walk. And so that what that says to me is it's super important that he stays in his own home if possible. Super important that he knows where he is and who he's with, right? He wants to be in his own home and kiss his own wife. Very important for him to have the capacity to be able to drink a really strong cup of coffee. So maybe make it for himself. He wasn't clear about that, but to be able to swallow, enjoy a strong cup of coffee, that was a value that was really important to him, to have that pleasure of that, and being able to walk his dog. And what that tells me is that companionship of animals. Again, knowing where I am, who I'm with, what's happening around me, and then physically being able to move the body. So, with that, we were able to explore what of those things would you be willing to live without? And he said, none of them. If any of those things is taken from me, then I would not want to pursue medical treatment any further. Um, we do the best we can, right, to honor people's preferences. But if we at least have an idea of what is really important to them, then we can help guide care based on that. So take some time with this part of the document. The second question or opportunity to comment on page 2 of 4 is, what are your beliefs, preferences, and practices? So this goes a little bit more into what do people need to understand, people making decisions for you or your healthcare team, about what really matters to you around what provides you support, what gives you comfort, what gives you strength during difficult times. And so this may be a religious practice, it may be a spiritual practice, it may be a personal belief. There's lots of things that you can comment on here. Um, Something related to beliefs, preferences, and practices are, what medical treatments would you want or not want based on your preferences or practices. And there's some examples here around blood transfusion, around pain management, around artificial feeding. Are there things that you strongly believe in pursuing or not pursuing based on your personal beliefs? Um, and another opportunity or question that's presented here is, how are healthcare decisions made in your community, culture, or family? Um, that's really helpful for your healthcare team and your medical decision makers to remember and understand about you. Um, Another thing to consider is any rites or rituals or ceremonies that you might want done on your behalf. If you were seriously ill or at end of life, are there certain poems that you would want read, hymns you would want sung? Do you need to be near a window? Is there some sort of essence that you want to make sure people understand of what you might be going through in that time? How do you feel about living? How do you feel about dying? There's a lot of opportunity for you to give more information here. And then you'll notice that it has a chance to write who's going to support that part of your being. Um, so that could be one of the same people you named on the first page, but it gives you an opportunity to name somebody different who might be able to support you and your family or community around that part of your being, but not make medical decisions on your behalf necessarily. Um, So some people consider naming the pastor of their church or a chaplain who they know really well. For some people, they just have that one sister or brother or dear friend who they know would know exactly what to do, what music to play, how to set up the room, who to have in the room, who to not have in the room. Those parts of being really a guardian over that part of your being. So you could name, again, it could be this one of the same people you named on the first page, or it could be somebody different. And then name and date of birth at the bottom there, like on every page. So if we go to page 3 of 4, we're continuing that with preparing your healthcare agent. What other information is really helpful for your healthcare agent to understand about your preferences? And this piece talks about CPR. What are your wishes around CPR? So I'm just going to forward to the next slide that we do have a CPR guide that's available on our website that talks about what is CPR. So CPR is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It is a series of chest compressions and potentially artificial breathing um, that is initiated if we have had a complete cardiac arrest. So it's good to understand that CPR is initiated if we have died. Our heart and our breathing has stopped. And CPR is what we do to attempt to bring that person back to life. Um, so there's information on the CPR guide around understanding a little bit more what CPR is. Will CPR work for you? What are some data that we have around the success rate of CPR? Um, really important to get that information and understand a little bit more when we're making a decision around CPR. Um, so feel free to take a look at that and use that as a guide if needed to answer this part of the document around CPR. So what this document is speaking about is in hospital cardiac arrest. Um, so if you are in a hospital and your heart and breathing stops, how do you want us to proceed? The first box is I want CPR attempted, no matter what, period. I want it attempted. That's how I feel right now. Perfect. Choose that box. The second box allows you to say, I do want CPR attempted for my current state of health, unless this document is being used in the future and I have now had a major change in my health status, and I now have little chance of living a life that aligns with my goals and values that I've stated in this form or I've discussed with my healthcare agent, or I now have a disease or an injury that cannot be cured and I'm likely to die soon, or there's little chance of survival if my heart is started again. So that second box is sort of that middle ground that says, I want CPR now, but if it doesn't make sense in the future for me to continue to receive CPR, then I give permission to whoever's making decisions on my behalf to make me a DNR or a do not resuscitate in the future. So that's that middle section. The third box is I do not want CPR attempted at all, ever, period. And so if somebody says, if we're reviewing these documents or we're helping somebody and they say, I don't want CPR at all, then we need to consider a POLST, which is an out of hospital medical order, which would guide emergency medicine 911 to let them know that we do not want CPR. And then that document can also be used to guide that decision in the hospital. And we'll take a peek at the POLST in just a moment. Um, so CPR, I want it no matter what. I want it now unless it doesn't make sense in the future, then I would allow someone to change my mind for me in the future if it doesn't make sense down the road or I don't ever want it. Um, so again, there's that CPR guide on the website if that would be helpful. And let's talk briefly about POLST. So POLST is an advanced care planning document. Different than an advanced directive, it is not a legal document, it is a medical order. So a POLST, the POLST stands for Portable Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It is intended to guide emergency medical care, out of hospital emergency medical care. A POLST is not for everybody. So at the beginning of the class, we talked about how an advance directive is really appropriate for anyone 18 years of age and older. A POLST is really intended for individuals who are seriously ill or have a frail medical condition where full emergency medical care has the potential to do more harm than good. It does not establish a healthcare agent. It must be signed by a physician, a physician assistant, or a nurse practitioner, and the patient or their health or their medical decision maker. Um, and this can be followed by emergency medicine in the field. A legal document cannot. So even if you take an advance directive and you said, I don't want CPR, and you post that on on your refrigerator, they cannot follow emergency medicine cannot follow a advance directive, but they can follow a medical order. So again, a POLST form is intended to communicate to emergency responders a patient's wish to limit emergency medical care for some reason. Um, Most people wish to receive full emergency medical care. If you think, of course, I would want full emergency medical care, I don't want to limit it at all, then you do not need a POLST. A POLST is just intended to communicate that limit into emergency medical care. If you are curious whether you would need a POLST or whether it would be appropriate for you or have some questions around whether CPR would help you or any other questions about emergency medical care and POLST, then please talk with your provider about that. Your primary care provider is probably the best one to talk to, or whichever provider you trust the most. So, continuing on with preparing your healthcare agent, there is another question around medical decision making, and that is around the use of life support. Um, it's talking about withdrawing or withholding life sustaining treatment in specific situations under Washington state law. Um, the specific situations may look familiar, as is these two scenarios are often discussed in a separate healthcare directive. So we're talking about if you are so sick or injured that you are likely to die soon, or it's a terminal condition, or you are in a coma and unlikely to recover. How do you want your healthcare agents to proceed with making medical decisions on your behalf? So there's four boxes here that you can choose from. The first one is use all life support to keep me alive, even if there's little chance of recovery. I would want to stay on life support. That's your first choice. The second choice is sometimes considered a temporary use of life support. So it's try all life support treatments that healthcare providers think might help me recover. So that could be everything that you could imagine. It could be a breathing machine to help you breathe. It could be antibiotics. It could be dialysis. It could be a number of treatments. If that treatment does not work and there is little chance of living a life that aligns with my goals and values, then I don't want to stay on life support. At that point, allow me to die naturally. So I will say with those two first choices, there's some additional information which is really helpful to give to whoever's making decisions on your behalf, and you'll see it in that little bubble to the left below the box. And that is that if you choose to continue life support, whether long term in that first choice or a temporary use in the second box, it's super helpful to give information for how long. What period of time would you want to consider to continue treatment to give yourself a chance to see if it's going to work? And keep in mind again, this is in a scenario where you are likely to die soon. Been given a terminal diagnosis, likely to die within a short period of time, or you're in a coma and unlikely to recover. If you would want to continue treatment for a long period of time or a short period of time, how long are you willing to give it? And really, most importantly, what would be your acceptable outcome? Do you only want to continue treatment if you have the likelihood of full recovery? if you're able to leave the hospital, but you would still be willing to be on some sort of life support. Only if you can recognize your family and loved ones, etc. So give some parameters around how long are you willing to try life sustaining treatment and what's your hoped for outcome or what's your acceptable outcome. If we go down to the third choice on the document, it says, allow me to die naturally. I don't want to be on any life support if I'm in one of those two scenarios. And if life support has already been started for some reason, I want it to be stopped immediately and be allowed to die natural death. Um, and then the fourth box is I want my healthcare agent to decide for me. So if Melissa and I are sitting with people, we rarely let people get away with just choosing the last box because really the reason why you're engaging in this conversation and completing these documents is so your healthcare agent doesn't have to decide for you. But if you want to give specific direction to your healthcare agent for these scenarios, you're welcome to do so. An example might be, if I chose, and this is an exception where you could choose more than one box. So if I choose allow me to die naturally, I don't want to be on life support. If it's already been started, I want it stopped. But I want my healthcare agent to decide for me around timing. Um, I'm one of those folks who moved away from my family and I live on the West Coast, but most of my family's on the East Coast. And so I would want to give my family a little bit of time to come and be with me before life sustaining treatment was stopped. Again, that would be my preference, may or may not be possible. Um, if we're working with somebody who has young children, they might say, I would not want to continue treatment, but I would want my healthcare agent to decide on timing. Um, or want my healthcare agent to get my prayer group together and pray for 1 week. And then if it's still not working, then stop. So if you want to give more instruction to your healthcare agent around timing or anything specific, then you can choose that box with one of the above boxes. But we strongly encourage you to not just choose that box, that last box. However, if that's what is true for you and you really can't make a decision around this, choose the last box. And then the more information you've given in the other parts of the document will help them decide for you. So if that's what feels true to you, feel free to do that. So one thing we want to just make sure that people are very aware of is that medicines used to keep you comfortable, ease pain, anxiety, breathlessness are not considered life-sustaining treatment. So it's not continue to treat or do nothing. It just is a shift in the focus of care. So rather than life-sustaining treatment to prolong living or potentially to prolong the dying process, the shift is more towards comfort oriented care. But your pain, anxiety, breathlessness, your hygiene, all of those things will still be honored and followed, even if you choose to discontinue life sustaining or life prolonging treatment. So lastly, on page 3 of 4 is additional directions around two key components of care. One is if you were dying and medical care support system and resources allow, what are your preferences as far as where you go through your dying process? Would you prefer to be at home or the home of a loved one? Again, if care is available and resources allow, with hospice if desired. If you have a strong opinion about not having hospice involved, feel free to write that in there. Um, would you rather complete your living experience and go through your dying experience in a medical facility? So if some people feel strongly they would not want to die at home and they would want to be surrounded by medical personnel and have that level of support. You can choose that. I don't have a preference. Some people say that. there's a little space after I don't have a preference where you can fill in. Melissa gives a great example of her father-in-law. I don't have a preference, whatever's cheapest, and that very much aligns. She shares with who he is as a person. I've also had people say I don't have a preference, whatever's easiest for my family. So again, the more information you can give, the more ease you're providing for those who need to make decisions for you down the road. There is an other box. Um, Many of our communities have hospice houses. And so some people are starting to write on those lines. I would want to be in the hospice house if there's room available, or whatever else you want to include there. Um, so the next section may or may not apply to you, and that is that if you are pregnant or of childbearing years, and you have a major medical event and you have an advance directive, one thing to understand is that Washington state law states that all measures must be taken to save both mom and baby, regardless of what the advance directive says, if a person is known to be pregnant. Um, but that doesn't mean that you can't write what your preferences would be for the kind of care you would or would not get, or how the care would be guided around you. So if pregnancy does not pertain to you or has never pertained to you, you can cross this section out. If it does, some things that we have seen people write in here is if you have a preference for skin on skin contact, if you have a preference for who would hold the baby first, if you would want to still try breastfeeding, even if you were on life support. Um, you can also write here who you would prefer to care for the baby if you did not survive. Just keeping in mind that this is not a legal document stating who would be their legal guardian, but absolutely can write preferences related to anything around that. Um, and then name and date of birth at the bottom of the page. So lastly, page 4 of 4 has a part at the top for any additional directions. So if you have any additional documents, for example, that you would want to also be considered to help guide your care, we'll be talking briefly about the Dementia Directive. That is an opportunity for you to speak to the kind of care you would or would not want if you were in mild, moderate, or severe stages of dementia. If you completed that supplemental document, super helpful to write on this one, see Dementia Directive if needed. We do have some COVID addendums, some samples of them on our website. Some people are wanting to be very specific about the kind of care they would or would not want if they got COVID. You could write here, see COVID addendum if it applies. Um, any additional information that you would want to give. Um, you'll see here on this document that it says, please note that your wishes for organ donation and plans for your remains, or how you want your body cared for at time of death, should be documented separately. Um, they really should be documented separately if you want someone other than family to make decisions for you after you have died. A good thing to know is that who you name on this document as your healthcare agent on the durable power of attorney for healthcare, their authority ends the moment that you die. Any decisions after that around, they give some examples here, organ donation, care of your remains, would go automatically to your blood family. So if you want to name somebody specific, or you want to name somebody who's not blood family, there are separate documents that you can complete. And feel free to reach out to myself or Melissa if that situation pertains to you. If it would be family making those decisions regardless, we believe it's really helpful to just give a bit of information here under additional directions. And it can be something as simple as, at the time of my death, I am an organ donor, and then my wish is green burial. At the time of my death, I am not an organ donor and my wish is cremation. Something as simple as that. What that does is, again, it gives that additional information for your family who will likely be grieving and maybe using a different part of their brain. When a healthcare professional asks them, "Do you know if your mom, sister, friend was an organ donor, and do you know how you want their body, how she or he wanted their body cared for at time of death?" So it helps remind them of what your decisions were and avoid any conflict. So we spoke briefly about the Dementia Directive. It is available on our PeaceHealth website. It's also available for free download at www.dementia-directive.org. It's a really well done document created by Dr. Brock Gaster, who is a primary care doctor in Seattle at UW, and it breaks dementia down into stages. The reason why it's helpful to talk about dementia separately is that even though dementia is a terminal diagnosis, it may or may not be covered by most advanced directives because the wording in most advanced directives say that the terminal diagnosis would likely cause death within a short period of time. And what we know about dementia is that it can last for many, many years. So it may or may not be covered in advanced directive. It also, for most people around dementia, really depends on the quality of their life and what they're able to do, how they're able to engage. So we appreciate that this document has broken dementia down into stages, and it gives you an opportunity to say, what would you want the focus of your health decisions to be if you were in mild, moderate, or severe dementia. So I encourage you to take a look at that document if dementia is a concern of yours or you're just curious to take a look. So lastly, we get to the part of the document where you will sign it, and keep in mind that you do not want to sign it until you are in front of either two witnesses or a notary. Washington State allows this document to be legal by signing in front of two witnesses or a notary. Um, we do strongly encourage notary. Notary are becoming a little easier to find these days. There may or may not be a notary in your primary care doctor's clinic. I encourage you to ask. Lots of banks will do notary for free. So notary is helpful to make it more of a legal document in some people's eyes, because even though Washington does allow two witnesses or a notary, there are many states that require notary to make these documents valid. So if you ever plan to leave the state of Washington, as most of us do, it might be helpful to get it notarized. Or if you're concerned that the document may be contested in any way or create any conflict in your family, super helpful to have it notarized. Um, if you do choose to have it witnessed by two people, please keep in mind that there are very specific requirements for who can and cannot witness this document. So that's included on the document. Um, okay, so I think I'm going to hand it back over to Melissa. Thank you for your attention.
Sounds good. Thanks, Hillary. So now we're going to talk about what to do or what happens once you've completed the document. So um, from this point, the next step would be to decide who will be your healthcare agent and have a conversation with them about your wishes. So that step would actually come prior to the filling in of the full document. And again, you'll want to talk to those people. You'll want to share with them some of the things you've thought about, explored, or continue to explore after our time together today. Uh, you'll then want to complete the form itself. So that is the durable power of attorney for healthcare form, and sign the document and have it witnessed or notarized. So again, as Hillary said, it has to be witnessed or notarized, not both. And once you've completed that, as just kind of a last check, you want to make sure that your name and date of birth are on every page of your document before you move forward. Once it's completed, you've got your people in place, you've had those conversations, you've signed it in front of your witnesses or your notary, you've made sure your name and date of birth are on every page. You'll then make copies of your advance directive documents. You want to keep the original. In terms of how many copies to make, you'll want to give a copy to your healthcare agent and any alternates that you'll name. You also would want to get one on file with your primary care provider, and then mail or fax a copy to be on file with your preferred, as well as any other hospitals where you may receive care. So, for example, here in Southwest Washington, we have more than one hospital in our community. And if there was an emergent situation, you may have a preferred hospital, but they may have to take you to the other one. And so making sure that your document is clearly available um, in the areas where you are most likely to um, receive that care in an emergency situation. Another component to think about is to have the document on file at the hospital that's closest to your home address on your ID. So if you were to be out of the area, you're visiting friends and family on vacation, whatever it is, and something was to happen, and they look at your ID, they will then oftentimes call the hospital that's closest to your documented address and say, "Hi, I have so and so here. Do you have any information? Do you have an advance directive or pulse document on file in their chart?" And then the hospital would be able to say, "Yes, actually, we do," and get that sent over, and it could then still be used to guide care. So, I can speak for PeaceHealth. If you aren't a PeaceHealth patient, have never been a PeaceHealth patient, even if you don't have plans to be a PeaceHealth patient, but let's say a PeaceHealth hospital is the closest hospital to your home address, then PeaceHealth will create a medical record for you that will only contain your advance directive. So they will create a chart, you'll get a medical record, and then within that chart, there will be no other information other than that healthcare directive. So just keep that in mind as you're navigating this process. Beyond that, you've completed the document, you've gotten it in your chart. You'll also want to think about whether there's any other types of supporting documents that you may want to complete. So some examples that are on here are wishes on organ donation. So exploring that and what that looks like and what types of documents you would need to complete prior to your death in order to make sure that your wishes can be followed, depending on what that looks like for you. Completing a healthcare directive. So that's another component in some areas of the advanced care planning process. And that's where you would make some decisions and in a legal document around your wishes for life sustaining treatment. So if that's something you'd like to explore, we have a copy available on our website. The Dementia Directive, as Hillary pointed out, that's another supporting document that you could complete, a COVID-19 addendum, and then your plans for your body disposition. So any of these documents would be important to look into. You could include them in additional information on your advance directive if you're filling them out at the same time as you're completing your document we went through today, but also to continue that conversation with your loved ones, with your important people, so that they're aware of the supporting documents that you have completed as well. On the advanced directive document that we walked through, there's also a wallet card. So here's a little snip of it here, but you can complete this and carry it with you. We suggest putting it right behind your license and within your wallet, so that then it's really clear that you have a document completed and who your healthcare provider is, um, how to get in contact with them, but also who your healthcare agent is and a way to reach them. So it can be helpful to have that more quickly and readily available. Again, this isn't a substitute for a legal document, but it can be just a nice resource to add within your wallet. So from this point, there's some opportunities to look for when to continue the conversation and revise your documents. Again, it can be updated and revised at any time. So if you change your mind in a month, a year, whenever something happens, you can absolutely update your document. But as a general guideline, this is what we would recommend. The six is, we say, remember the 6 Ds. So the first would be every decade. So, at a minimum, revisiting your document, checking in, thinking through the decisions that you've made, the conversations that you've had, and the people that you've named at a minimum of every 10 years. More often, um, is going to be dependent on just life circumstance, health changes, which we'll get into, but at a minimum every decade. The next reason to check in on it would be a divorce. So the most obvious would be that if you had a divorce and you had named your spouse or your partner as your healthcare agent on your legal document, and then you want to change that, um, then you would want to revisit. But sometimes people name in-laws, and maybe there's been a change in that relationship too. So just using that as a guideline for thinking through the document and who you've named. Another checkpoint would be a diagnosis. So that could be a new diagnosis for you that changes treatment you would want to receive, or um, the people you would want involved in your care. It could also involve a new diagnosis for your healthcare agent. So maybe they're experiencing some sort of change in their health status that might prevent their ability to serve in that capacity, or their time or their availability, whatever it might be. But that could be another reason you'd want to update. Decline. So this could be a decline in the health of you or of your agent. So if something has changed, your it probably goes hand in hand with that diagnosis before, but if there's things that are going on that are causing you to feel differently about the type of care you would or would want not want to receive, or changes going on in the health of your healthcare agent that again would impact their ability to serve in that capacity, check back in. The next would be death. So the most obvious reason for checking in on your advance directive related to death would be the death of your named healthcare agent. Um, but also sometimes experiencing the death of those around us or people that we knew, um, can cause us to reflect on our own wishes or choices in relation to that death experience. So maybe something happened where you really saw a beautiful death and someone received exactly the care that they wanted, and their family was able to be involved in the way that they had hoped for. Reflecting on that and making sure that what you take from that is clear in your document also, can be a nice exercise. And then the last one would be distance. So as we have become a culture who is more spread out, if you or your healthcare agent were to move further away, and that could impact you having a local agent or someone in the same time zone, um, or you now have moved to a different state and maybe the requirements are different, or making sure that your document gets on file in the state where you're now living, then it would be important to revisit your document as well. And that is the end of our presentation and our time together. We want to thank you so much for being here today. We want to thank you for taking the time to engage in these really important conversations and just emphasize what a gift you're giving to the people around you by being willing to have this conversation. If you need any other resources, support, assistance, or we can provide any clarifications on anything we talked about today, please visit our website, which is listed on this slide. And then also our contact information is on here as well for myself and Hillary. But with that, thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.